Hello everyone, welcome to session about emerging AI trends in telecom industry. My name is Hadi Nejatian. I'm Senior Solution Architect at Amazon Web Services Telecom International Business Unit. Today with us we have two distinguished panelists, Hesham Fahmy, Chief Information Officer at TELUS, and Professor Mohammad Zolfagari, Global Technology Lead at AWS Telecom IBU. Two distinguished individuals at the forefront of integrating AI into industry and telecom industry in specific. So thanks for joining, gentlemen, to our session.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Thanks.
We need to go back about what has been happening, or been discussed in the past 18 months about this topic of the Gen AI. That at the beginning we thought it might be a topic of like a fad that it was just sound interesting. But now 18 months passed. We now should agree, believe that the debate is over, that now Gen AI has to be integrated into solutions or services of all organizations, including telecommunication. So to kick this conversation, I would like to get both of you gentlemen perspective around what do you see the current state of AI in telecommunication industry or in general? Because, for instance, I know, so TELUS is becoming a world technology leader, right? Not only be a telecom company, but also a technology leader, software-centric. Really, we see lots of focus on offering services as SaaS to not only your end customers, but also to other CSPs. So therefore, it's very interesting to see and know your perspective on those general trends of AI and within the industry.
Well, thank you, Hadi, and thank you for having us today. Great question to start off with. I think the reality AI has been around for decades. Right. And you could argue we've been doing it at scale probably for the last 10 years or so. But what's changed, calling the last 18 months? And really it's about the barrier for entry has become a lot lower, and the barrier to extract value out of AI has become a lot easier. And so what I think from a macro level, there's three things that AI in general, and specifically Gen AI, will do. I think the first is we're really going to see a step change improvement in productivity, especially for knowledge workers. The second thing is I think Gen AI is going to be something that's going to be what I call the great equalizer. It's going to level the playing field for a lot of folks. And then the third thing is it's going to really improve customer experiences. We're going to enter a whole era of some pretty amazing customer experiences. So if I take those three different things, the productivity, there's research papers out there that's saying probably 60 to 70% of a knowledge worker's time is in rote tasks, and that could be automated or assisted out, right? And so if you think of what that could do from a productivity gain, and an interesting statistic from Canada, where TELUS is based out of, family physicians spend about 18 million hours just doing administrative, writing the notes and patient notes. And if that's a great use case for Gen AI. If that could all be summarized and collected, take it away, just those 18 million hours, that's 55 million patient visits that you free up in capacity in your existing healthcare system. Right. So it's just take that and multiply it by all the different industries, it's going to be huge. Then when it comes to leveling the playing field, if you think about it now, every knowledge worker, or every human for that matter, now has a personal assistant that has the same body of knowledge, that has the same access to information that everyone else has. What does that do in terms of, creating equality and upskilling the whole workforce? I even look at just from education. What would the world be now when every child now has that same access to a personal tutor, that the same body of knowledge? So that's the second one. And then the third, you think of customer experiences now. We're entering a whole era of, how do I have very hyper-personalized content and delivery, where it's in the language that I know, in the dialect I know, that's very tailored to my needs. You start opening up a huge, a spectrum of these wonderful experiences that you can create. And so I think those are going to be the three macro trends, and it's something TELUS is leaning in on all three for those.
Amazing. So Mo, what do you think?
I totally agree. Since its emergence, the generative AI has captivated our collaborative imaginations. So Gen AI in the last 18 months has been instrumental in creating value-added services on top of the connectivity, and changed the experience not only for end customers, but also for telecoms and also different industries. And it's not a fleeting hype. It's working. It's real, and we have witnessed in the last 18 months the various number of implementation, development, and unprecedented acceleration of use cases that Gen AI can have on different industry. Telecom is one of them, and one of those actually AWS has intense focus on. And I totally agree with Hisham. This is going to be the emerging technology for telcos on different levels, all the way from cost saving, operational enhancement, increasing the performance, all the way to the consumer experience. So, and then that's where AWS and TELUS are working together to bring these to reality using the use cases and the different verticals that we are working together.
Yeah, those are great points, right? Because to your point, these are the impactful and transformative trends that now we're seeing by having Gen AI and AI being integrated into all aspects of the business, from process perspective all the way to even you mentioned about the worker and the people side of the ecosystem. But so therefore, I would like to if you can go deeper now into this conversation. Then so let's start with you, Mo. Then how do you think AWS, and then tell us later, can really help around shaping this new trend and transformation within the industry?
Absolutely. So let me actually step back and tell you more about what can we offer to all the customers in order to help them in this transition, transformational transition. So if we looking at it just in terms of macro level, so we're talking about infrastructure and application layer. On the infrastructure, all the way from the hardware and the hardwares like GPUs and the infrastructure that can handle these Gen AI models, all the way up to applications in terms of how we can bring the talents and employees of the telcos to be able to bring the bar down for them to get into this innovative area and then learn about the Gen AI and and enable them to develop faster and create innovative applications, and giving them the playgrounds that they can actually work with different models. All the way from infrastructure to application layer, AWS offers a number of services. And also the different services, the 200 plus services we have around the generative AI services that we are offering are crucial here, because that's where you can innovate fast and then create the use cases, the value-added services I mentioned before around the generative AI, and create the meaningful scenario for end customers and consumers to do that. So there are a number of services. I'm not going through all of them, but so for example, we have AWS Bedrock, which is API based, and you can leverage a number of LLMs using that. So we have Amazon Q that actually you can ask about your business and get personalized answers about the operational model of your own business. There's SageMaker and SageMaker Studio and Jumpstart, where gives the talents and employees the capability to quickly start to learn and deploy into the Gen AI era. And there are much more. So that's and together with telcos like TELUS, who are pioneers and innovators in the field. So it's not all about leveraging the services by TELUS and other customers. So we're talking about the co-innovation and co-development of these innovative solutions together, and have a joint go-to-market solutions together.
That was a great point, right? But before we get into that joint development and co-innovation, which I believe it's really impactful. It's going to be very exciting and interesting. Again, going back to Hisham and ask about again, what do you think TELUS' role will be in reshaping this AI industry? Because I personally have lots of communication with you and the team and other business units. I know that what you're doing are really impactful, but I really like to hear that from you and our audience hear that from you. And after that, as a follow-up, again, you mentioned about the customer experience use case that man mentioned. What is TELUS is doing about, for your customers or even for your internal customer to improve that customer experience leveraging AI?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with the first question. So what is TELUS is doing in there? I think our responsibility is to show it in reality, make it real.
Right.
So everything that Mo talked about, you created all the great tools, all the great platforms and everything, but until someone actually translates them into something of value, tangible that customers can use, it's just a dream, right? And so that's what our role taking in, and we're leaning in on that very heavily. And so we're doing it in two ways. So the first way we did is we can't have a central team, of our AI and data scientists are figuring out every use case that's out there. You want this to come and be a groundswell and crowdsourced. And so what we did is we used these great platforms, but we created it in a TELUS secure way. So we packaged everything that Mo talked about, but packaged it in a way that says, okay, it stays within TELUS. We know its security posture. We know the data is secure. We can have all those kind of trust of the whole system. And then we opened it to all the employees. And we said, go and play with it. And play with it and feel safe and secure that you can do with it, but just now take your imagination and see what it can do for you. And this is where you started seeing some very interesting uses of it. So we'd see our legal team using it as a coach, so to brief, they'll take legal briefings, but how to summarize it, but then figure out a position and a counter position, and then use the Gen AI as a debate partner, saying, okay, what have I got missing in some of my arguments here? We've seen our finance teams use it and procurement teams to how do they use it to process many procurement documents and SOWs and MSAs and generate new ones from it. We've seen our marketing teams use it to generate content and translate. And so you start seeing just there you start creating the use cases. So that's been really great to see. And how do we encourage that? And then from stuff that we purposely, as TELUS said, these are TELUS-specific use cases we want to do, we've done a few of them that are customer-facing. And so one we'll talk about a bit later, but we've got a great partnership in what we're doing with the smart home. And how do we make those smart homes really accessible and truly become your personalized home that you talk to? And so we can talk to that a bit later. But we've also done things around our customer support. And how do we make our agents get to answer a lot quickly? So you'll still have a human agent, but how do we create an assistant for the agent that can help them and be the body of knowledge saying, okay, this is Hadi's problem. Right. How do I get to that answer in 10 seconds or less? And it's a meaningful answer. And then we've turned it internally. Many of our employees encounter difficulties. Again, how do they have an assistant there that can help them figure out, how they need to reset passwords or gain access to systems? Again, that was another use case we built in that just made day-to-day life a lot easier. Nice. So I think that's our role is putting it in action. And I think what we haven't talked about here too is, and I think this is something that TELUS, holds very near and dear, is we have to make sure that AI is done responsibly. Yeah. And so how do we lead by example? And for us, trust and privacy is a big value for TELUS. And so we're leading by example and showing how to do this right. How do you put the right guardrails around it? How do you actually have responsible AI and show that you can actually build trust and trust in this technology?
That's very interesting because again, as someone been following you, beside responsible AI, which is I believe truly a valid point, right, about transparency, being fair and accountable for what you deliver to your customers. You also mentioned in your previous conversations about how TELUS or the AI can really help remove that digital gap, right? Mm-hmm. How we can make sure that AI become more accessible to everyone, to all the organizations. So in this case, as Mo mentioned, cloud service providers become a very instrumental role to removing that gap and, to your point, democratizing AI across the industry. So what's your point of view around what cloud providers can really help general industry, and in this case also TELUS, about making AI more accessible, make you accelerate development and deployment of all these AI-based and Gen AI-based solutions?
All the cloud providers and AWS specifically are doing a great job in providing the tool set that we need, all the capabilities. But when you look at it, that's a lot of offerings. Mo said over 200 offerings. And so that can be quite overwhelming, right, of where to start. So I think really where the value add comes now is how can you start packaging these things into like sort of blueprints or templates saying, okay, well, here's a use case of how you'd apply it in this kind of scenario, in this kind of industry, whether it's a telco-specific use case or a finance-specific use case, and build a bit of those blueprints so that becomes the barrier even lower, right? The sort of just follow that best practice. And then what's important, how do you layer on top of that, is how do you make sure you put all the right guardrails and protection measures in there so that you're doing things right and you're not accidentally, causing problems. And there's basics around security and privacy. We all know those. But as we get into LLMs and foundational models, we know, first of all, they can hallucinate. So how do you put grounding in those models? How do you have citations? How can you trust, again, the output of the model? But the other part of it, too, and we've learned from TELUS, is especially in these retrieval augmented generation scenarios, the output is only as good as the data you put into it. So we've realized actually there's a whole data curation process too. And so I think this is where cloud providers can help too, because you hold all our data and we have them there, but how do you help us in that data curation and making sure the data is of good quality, and where we have gaps in the data, we're filling it, and when we have data that's incorrect, we're correcting that. I think those are areas then that truly make Gen AI then applicable, if you will.
So Mo, you kind of touched on it, right, about the role that cloud providers can play. Why don't we go deeper around how do you think AWS can help and can collaborate and work with TELUS to really accelerate the adoption of the AI?
I totally agree with Hisham. So again, if I want to go to the macro level, even in AWS Telecom, we have started to reorganize and restructure our business in a way to meet the customer demands around this area as well. So now we're focusing on like 3 areas: transforming the telco businesses using the number of services that we mentioned, through the second option, which is through the different industries, smart health, agriculture, X, Y, Z, and to be able to change the consumer experience. So we are laser focused, and one of the main driver behind this decision was the Gen AI that actually changed the industry dynamics. So we are laser focused to deliver this. So we changed that's the first step that we've done. The second part is that we started change the strategy to how to tackle the implementation of the Gen AI with our telco customers. And then we started backward from the end user, as you just mentioned, Hisham, just like how we can create the reimagining the consumer experience, and then how Gen AI can help not only to bringing a bar down for the customers to have smart solutions, but also create personalized offer for these consumers, and bring it back all the way in different steps, that how we can do it responsibility at edge. For example, on the smart home case solutions, how can we learn about the routines, profiling of the home or the consumers responsibly and securely with privacy at the edge, and then how we can scale it using the cloud to different regions, even with your partners in different countries, and all the way back to how to reduce the cost of the call centers, how to prevent the faults, X, Y, Z. So all the way from end consumer back to the operation and the IT and OT. We started actually to create like different layers of blueprint architectures to start to tackle these problems. The third one I'm going to touch on is we're working with TELUS and other telcos in different standard bodies. One of them is Telemanagement Forum. So we started to take this, the impact of the responsible AI seriously. So one example of many I can mention is IG 1317, which is a work group that is working on the security and Gen AI security on top of the B2B2X extraction and expansion. And on top of that, we're creating, with TELUS and other partners, the blueprint focused on the different consumer verticals. So we don't want to boil the ocean. We don't actually go and say we have a generative AI and the data model that works with everything. We just create an infrastructure that works for one small vertical, let's say smart home security, and slowly expanding into different verticals, but reusable. So in a way that these assets are reusable. So those foundation models, with TELUS, we started it like a few years ago. IG1264 is example of like B2B2X a model that in Blueprint we built together. And TELUS has the very world's first implementation of those Blueprint architecture, which is not only replicable for their own consumers, but I mean through their partners in a B2B2C way for other consumers around the world. And cloud actually AWS Cloud can help them to accelerate fast with resilience and privacy.
You brought up a good point, data quality and data, because in order for these Gen AI, to avoid all kinds of hallucination, you need to provide more data to give more context, basically provide more personalized response. But one of the challenges that we see nowadays is that there are lots of data silos across organizations because there are systems that each to generate data. There are lots of synergy having all this data together, analyzed together, and provide that context to those LLMs as you and Mo mentioned. So what is TELUS' strategy to make sure that you can provide proper data, right, and valid data into those large language models that you have? So around accessibility of data.
How long do you have? Because I can spend the next 3 hours talking about that. I think that's a challenge, any large enterprise has these days, right? And what you have is you've, over the years amassed a lot of data, and it's very fragmented across, your ecosystem. So I think, again, we take it in layers and steps, right? I think the first layer that we did was just cataloging our data. That's the hardest part first, is just understanding what data do you have in your enterprise and where is that data, and what are the schemas of those data, what does the data mean, and everything. And so having a good catalog. So that we spent a very long time just doing that part. The second part was the big debate where do you try to now bring all the data together in a central repository, or do you leave it federated? Right. And there's pros and cons to both. But I think the approach we said is, leave the data in their systems of record. But how do you then stream all that data? And then that's the part where you cleanse the data, you dedupe the data, you cleanse it and everything, and you bring that into your central repository. That now is your repository for insights and analytics and customer experiences. And so that's the step we did in sort of building that federated model. And now how do you have the robust pipelines that bring all this data in real time fashion, and then do all the data cleansing that has to happen. And in that data cleansing, it's a combination of really cleaning the data because you have inconsistencies in the data, but this is where you add the layer of privacy and protection. So where necessary, do you anonymize the data, right? And do you tokenize things out? And where appropriate, do you let the data flow through? But this is where you can implement all that policy so that you can trust your central data hub that you have. And so I think that's maybe a quick summary of how we've kind of approached it, right? Doing it. But then once you've got that sort of data hub, and then this is where cloud providers have really helped us build that. Now it's a trusted data source. We know it's comprehensive. We know what all the data means, and we know where its lineage is, where it comes from and how it can be trusted. And we know it's safe and secure, and we know it's been cleansed. And so hence now it becomes a trusted data source that we use for many other purposes.
You identify multiple challenges, right? Data is one of them. So now, based off your extensive experience on AI, both of you, what would be your advice to an organization that they want to adopt AI into their system, into their process and culture? What would you advise to them if they want to have a successful integration of AI?
I'm going to answer this question, but before that, actually, I just want to deep dive one level more to what we have done together as an example, and to double click on what Hisham just said. So on the smart home, we have been privileged to work with TELUS and we launched on December 8th, 2023, the first employee trial of the Smart Home Plus, TELUS Smart Home Plus, based on the blueprints that Hisham was talking about, integrated with the generative AI. And that's a good example how we can actually create value-added services with Gen AI in its DNA to transform the consumer journey. What does it mean is, let me give you a few examples. What if I tell you, you can talk to your voice assistants and say, oh, it's a bit dark here. and it understands what does dark mean, what does here mean, what does a bit mean, and actually says, okay, you're in the living room, and then it's daytime, I'm going to open the curtains, or if it's nighttime, I'm going to brighten the lights a little bit higher, but not all the way up. It's a very basic example, but go to the complex scenario, you don't need routines anymore. Automation to autonomous operation inside the home. So you can talk and you can actually express your feeling, and the Gen AI can actually change the ambient using the devices that you have at home for you. And that's the vision that TELUS had. And in collaboration with AWS, we managed to create and launch this product. And it's just a start. We are just at the edge of this new era. We're just exploring, but the results are amazing. You can see how immediately using this technology you can expand your blueprint to different verticals like home health monitoring, energy management, X, Y, and Z. And how you can actually leverage the Gen AI to do the fault prevention and for example, something goes wrong in the home, I cannot connect my smart door lock, and then it guides you how to do that. It's more convenient, less frustration for the customer, and it reduces the cost for the call center, TELUS cost center as well, helping to reduce the total end-to-end cost by 50%, and go all the way back to the back end. Then we together actually we are developing the connected customer journey, where we getting all those democratized data that Hisham was talking about, bring into the a telco lake, and using the data meshes, we can create a catalog of the data, feed into this telco lakes, and then create the prediction model based on the Gen AI of the churn prevention, and then anomaly detections on like how this customer has been treated or is going to feel, and then trying actually to value the customer more and predict actually what is the best for the customer. So that's end-to-end for one small vertical example and the great success we've done together. And if I want to answer to your question that what is the recommendation, it's just like we learn from a number of interactions we've got with our valued customers. And then what I personally learned from collaboration with TELUS was amazing. So I think what this collaboration, why this collaboration was very successful was, one, we started with the talents. So we focused on the teams that are going to work on this, and then we started to actually educate them and provide them the tools that they can actually create value quicker and bring them to speed to this area, specifically in Gen AI. And second is just leveraging the services that I always say is there are undifferentiated heavy lifting services that give you the space, give your developers the space to innovate quicker instead of actually going to the burden of doing second day operational and maintenance. That gives the boost from the bottom, and then the strategic mindset and the leadership visions that Hisham and the team from the top senior management have to push the whole industry towards this vision, it has been crucial. Without, and I'm honestly very proud and then appreciate this vision, innovative vision that TELUS has to push the whole organization towards the right journey. And without these two pushes from bottom and top, I think nothing moves fast. And I'm talking about the experience of the last 15 years I had in the telco.
Well, that was a good wrap up. Basically, again, to put it in a nutshell and summarize it, basically, what you're saying is the sky is the limit, right? There are many or limitless options and the use cases that you can leverage. The success will be identify the problem, work back from it, and see how Gen AI can really transform it and provide a very transformative solution with that. Okay, gentlemen, it was a great conversation. Thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to our next year conversation. I believe that there are going to be lots of changes, and we're going to talk about lots of exciting new trends and innovations that happened in the generative AI domain. Yeah.
Thanks
For having us.
Absolutely.
Thanks.